In the build-up to the World Cup, we've been looking at all things Russia, as you know, in our A to Tsar podcast, available to download now. 20 episodes going from Aeroflot to Tsar Nicholas II's diversions via Borscht, Cyrillic alphabet, the FSB, Lenin, Rasputin, Smirnoff vodka, Russian modern jazz, rap, comedy. It's all there. Here's a story I wish I'd remembered about when we were recording, because like an idiot, I forgot that I knew that the band Placebo trod where most bands fear to tread with a tour of the far corners of Russia and made a brilliant film about it called Alt Russia. Stefan Ozdal it's sort of half of Placebo, if you like. Him and Brian Molko sort of stand at the front of the stage. I'm a big fan of the band. Declaration of interest there. You know, I went round to see Stefan last week. And by the way, we're tweeting out now one image from the film of Stefan in Red Square, which that picture kind of speaks 1,000 words. Have a look at that if you can. You can see it on the 5 Live Twitter feed. But here's Stefan all about the tour, why they went, and more importantly, I suppose, why they made this film.
It came about, I think it was our agent and our manager that proposed the idea. And we first said, that's crazy, we can't go to Siberia, you know, people get killed there. We just didn't know very much about it. There was an element of fear there and an element of rejection quite early on. But then we thought, you know, in the spirit of Placebo, saying no to tours that might not be conventional or where other bands go. So after talking about it, we said, well, this is exciting, you know, and we have a lot of fans in Russia. We've been going to Russia for 15 years. And the fan base had been growing, so we felt it was a natural progression.
But you were going to places which I've never heard of. I mean, in Siberia, you know, it wasn't. I know Moscow and St. Petersburg are in Siberia, but you've heard of those places, and you know, Volgograd and so on. But then out east, I'd never heard of those places. They're miles from anywhere.
Yeah, we took a flight from Moscow to the first city, and that was 5 hours, and we hadn't even gone halfway through Russia. It's immense. I mean, it's the biggest country on the planet. And like we were saying before, it borders so many different countries. There's so many different cultures. As we were planning it, we thought, well, it'd be crazy not to document it somehow.
There's so much smiling in the film. Everyone's smiling. I mean, you lot are smiling, but the punters are all smiling. Oh, obviously, everyone's always happy at a Placebo gig, but there was a special radiance to their smile.
Yeah, there was. And, you know, for us, I think we'd clocked up 1,000 gigs by then as a band. So, I mean, there's a certain part of you that's seen a lot of audiences and it had a lot of experience of playing. But this truly was like a rebirth because the energy was so pure and it was so full of love.
At the gigs, a lot of spontaneous stuff happened in the audience.
The last 2 gigs, I feel like the band's been really on fire. You know, we're really playing as a unit. And there's been some really nice touches. And this happens a lot in Russia and Eastern Europe. You know, they kind of do these kind of flash mobby kind of gestures. Yesterday, all of a sudden, all these red balloons appeared. The audience were just kind of like throwing red balloons towards the stage. The day before yesterday, all of a sudden, all these white paper airplanes were kind of zooming around the audience, and the whole stage was kind of covered in white paper airplanes. It's got a lot to do with the fact that I don't think very many bands come here at all. They go to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and that's about it. So it's a real kind of display of affection, and one that's communicated very powerfully. But it also means that they've kind of, you know, that they've come together as a group of people, almost as like a sort of a community, and planned this, which is really sweet.
It's a gesture of a community coming together and showing their appreciation, you know, and showing their love. For us as a band, it's an incredible thing to see, very emotional, because you're not used to someone else putting on a show for you when you're on stage. One day there was throwing airplanes, you know, paper airplanes around. On a previous tour, we played a song called Battle for the Sun, and people in the audience had taken with them CDs, and they were holding them to reflect the lights coming off stage. So we just saw, you know, these thousands of kind of shining suns, you know, in the audience.
Something else Brian, I think it was Brian said, he said, we've always attracted sort of misfits, as he put it, to our gigs.
People come to these gigs and they feel free enough to be themselves. We've always attracted the misshapes, the people who feel like they don't fit in, the square pegs in the round holes, and we've always felt that our gigs were a place for them to, you know, to be themselves. And, you know, there are so many places in the world that need that more than Europe, you know. So coming to Russia is important, you know.
I mean, I could relate to that. You know, when I was a kid, I just spent a lot of time by myself in my bedroom. You know, sense of isolation and the sense of trying to find out who the hell I was and trying to find, you know, connection with someone or some people. And we're often told that, you know, Placebo Gigs is a place where these people do not feel alone. I mean, walking around in Russia, I mean, the first things that we noticed when we started going there was just people just seemed to be very dour, you know? And there was just a sense of what's there to live for. You just get the feeling that they've had it really hard, you know, and it's been mostly about trying to put food on the table, you know, and trying to get through life without dying of cold or, you know, or not dying of alcohol poisoning.
But there wasn't a lot of open joy and smiling to be seen.
No, and just speaking to a lot of these kids, you know, that when they feel that they can actually do that, you can just see the relief on their faces, you know. So I think that, you know, they've just had a much harder life, you know, historically than a lot of us had.
Another big part of it, you were talking to artists as you went round. And when I first heard you'd done that, I was thinking about the film. I was, that sounds a bit worthy, really, you know. Then I thought, God, it was so interesting when I started watching it. And there's a guy at the beginning who makes a point and said, look, anything that offends traditional values in Russia is banned. But the trouble is nobody knows what traditional values are, so nobody knows what's banned. Everything is in this slightly dark grey area, isn't it? That's how art exists there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of the artists that I interviewed were kind of operating on a different existence to the kind of political existence of Russia. I mean, here in the West, we're just fed the bad news, you know, the stuff that's on wars, etc., you know. But there was a whole scene behind that, and I think that's what we wanted to explore. We wanted to see what was going on behind the headlines. So for us, the least important thing about this documentary is really the band on the road, you know. Yeah, Placebo playing Siberia. Yeah, that's cool. We're on the Trans-Siberian Express, romantic and beautiful. But, you know, the real stars of this documentary are the artists. And like you said, they're all kind of operating in their own little world, you know, and a lot of them felt disconnected to what was happening in Moscow and St. Petersburg.
But they're using that disconnection to some extent to make the art. So the animator, I thought, was really interesting. A woman saying, no, I mean, my Western friends envy me the freedom I've got here. But she's honest enough to say, it's because I'm not talking about politics. She made beautiful little animations about childhood and so on. So maybe people to some extent are driven to make simpler forms of art that specifically don't channel the politics, that don't challenge the politics of the place.
Perhaps. I mean, there were some artists there that were operating on a world level of international art. I mean, the Recycle Art Group, who were recycling old ideas of immortality or old material. You know, it's all about recycling. And they were at the Biennale, for example.
So we also did some pieces with Facebook cross, like Facebook with the letter F. It's like the cross.
I think that you've been exploring the topic of immortality online.
Yeah.
Like you will leave after yourself a kind of a virtual, you know, profile. The church has always promised an afterlife. Now, when you physically die, online you can live on. The fact that they're in Russia doesn't actually mean that they can't be operating on a scale and in a sphere that the rest of us can't connect to.
It's not as restrictive as you'd think in some respects, is it?
No, and I think the animator, she was actually funded by the government, you know, and I think in terms of the arts there, probably have more funding than perhaps in a place like the UK at the moment. I mean, when it got hairy was when we, you know, approached St. Petersburg and Moscow, because that's where I interviewed the independent TV channel, whose funding was just completely being restricted and sucked the air out of by the government. You know, there was just no funding, and they had to seek private funding in the end. And that's because they were running controversial stories, and they were being followed by the secret police. They were just saying, well, you know, we're used to being, you know, in fear, you know, living in fear. We're used to having a lot of bloodshed because Russia's history has been very bloody. In a lot of ways, it feels like Russia is kind of operating on its own type of political system, and people just live with it.
There's a great image of you with your rainbow guitar standing in Red Square. Now, was it an issue? Did you worry it'd be an issue? You being openly gay, the front man of a band, was that any more of an issue in Russia than it would or wouldn't be anywhere else?
I mean, before I went over there, I felt I had to do something. You know, if there's any politics that I'm vocal about, I mean, it is about basic human rights. And as a homosexual man, if I can just be open about it, I almost feel like it's my responsibility. So I thought, well, I'm going to spray paint my base, the rainbow, in the rainbow colors, the rainbow flag. And I was advised, don't do it, you know, because in Russia, the legislation then was, and it still is, that you are not allowed to promote non-traditional sexual relations to minors. And I thought, well, okay, well, I'm still going to do it. You know, we're traveling around with a security guard, so the risks of me getting arrested are probably pretty small. During the shows, there was 2 girls kissing in the front row, for example, you know, and the security guards, they couldn't actually do anything because it was to minors that this law applies, you know, and a lot of people, the kids were there, they're either 18 or if they were there and under the age of 18, it was their parents' responsibility. So there was kind of this safety bubble in a way. And being in Moscow, I felt that, you know, symbolically I wanted to do something, and it felt like I've got to do it. I've got to go on the Red Square with my rainbow base. The funny thing was on Red Square was that the police there were more concerned about the camera than my base, you know, because it's the political buildings around there, and they're just so hyper-tense about that. So the rainbow base was kind of the least of their issues.
You managed to get that picture taken without too much trouble. Whoever's taking the picture isn't about to be rugby tackled by several secret police.
I told the filmmaker, Charlie Target Adams, I said, listen, you have one shot, and then I'm out of here. You know, I'm not going to hang around. So it was literally, you know, run out on the Red Square, take the shot, and then get out of there. You know, I'm not stupid enough to run any risks in Russia, you know.
Talking about Red Square, you also came across, you know, this whole spectrum of artists. There was the gentle animator who was doing great work sort of under the radar. And then we end up with a guy who, I don't know how to put this politely, who'd nailed his testicles to Red Square in the past as a form of protest, and also had his mouth sewn up, physically sewn up as well in another piece of art. I mean, this is heavy stuff.
He lives and breathes his political activism. I just felt that he was a poet, and he was using his body as the vehicle to express himself. And it was just completely in his nature to stand up against what was happening. You know, he was a reactionary. And he started off, you know, as a contemporary of Pussy Riot. And that's why he sewed his lips up, you know, suture, I think it was called, just to basically say that you can't say what you want in this country. I think he's one of the most powerful, you know, images and powerful people to come out of the art movement in Russia at the moment, because it is so image-based, and the images, they go around so quickly all around the world.
So how did the testicle nailing come about? What inspired that?
He wanted to show emasculation, that basically the country had him by the balls, basically, you know, and he sat there naked with his head bowed, just saying, you know, it's like, okay, we just have to give up in a way, you know, resistance is almost futile. So I think he was criticized for that, just saying that, you know, it's like there is no hope left. But at the same time, I think it just sparked a lot of controversy, and a lot of people started talking. And you know, essentially, if you want to change things, you just have to bring things to the forefront, get people to talk about them, get the international community to talk about it. And he was willing to put his life on the line for it.
So you talked to some musicians as well. I love the guy who sort of played this long flute.
Hello, my name is Renat. I am from Bashkortostan. This instrument's name is kuray. Our national instrument is very important for us because all our life, our people, history is in this instrument.
It was down in Ufa, that area of Russia. It's close to the borders of, you know, the Arab countries. We would start off the tour close to the Mongolian border, and we would be having tea in yurts, you know. And then when we came down to see this musician in Ufa, there are mosques there, and you know, he's a Muslim, you know, and he was channeling the love of Allah.
And I make throat singing. And I can play and make throat singing together.
Yeah, he was essentially playing two instruments at once, with his mouth. He was, doing kind of droning with his throat, like singing it, and then he was singing melodies on the flute on top of it. God knows how he did it, It was an incredible journey throughout Russia to meet people who were doing things that you just would not normally be expecting.
What's your advice to those lucky enough to travel there to visit for this World Cup? Just sort of lean in and talk to people.
Be a little bit wary of where you are, but I think the best way is just to try to find someone who lives there and who wants to show you around. I think people are generally quite proud of where they live. Everyone's trying to find, the best way to live their life and trying to find hope and to find the light, really. So, yeah, I think when you're traveling, that is the best way. Don't try not to travel in a bubble.
Is there any one song from that time, for Placebo song, that reminds you of that tour, being in that place, being in Siberia or wherever?
We have a song called Exit Wounds, and for some reason just felt like that was very apt, and felt a certain connection to that.
That was Stefan Osdal from Placebo. Pleasure to talk to him. The film's called Alt Russia. It's by Charlie Target Adams. It's been on a global film festival tour over the last year. If you want to see it, watch this space. It will be broadcast on TV in the coming months. Keep an eye on Placebo's social media accounts for details. And to have listened to our entire A to Tar podcast, just head to the 5 Live website or your usual podcast provider. That's it from us, Simon and Mark. Next, first, the 5 Live news with Alison Acton.
On digital, online, smartphone and tablet. This is BBC 5 Live.